Hello, welcome listeners and market participants, and welcome to KBRA's European Credit Podcast, Conversations in European Credit. I'm Gordon Kerr, Head of European Research at KBRA, and today I am joined by my colleagues Emilie Nadler from our ESG team and Karim Nassif from our Project Finance and Corporate Ratings team. Today we will be covering the topic of the European Green Industrial Plan. Our conversation will focus on the recently published ESG report, which can be found on kbra.com. In February 2023, the European Commission announced the Green Deal Industrial Plan, which aims to accelerate the region's 2050 net zero emissions target by scaling up the EU's manufacturing capacity for net zero technology and related products. European officials wanted to create a more level playing field for the region and maintain the global competitiveness of Europe's green industries in recognition of the global clean technology race, with large investments being made by the US, China, Japan, India, and others. The move was largely a reaction to the US's Inflation Reduction Act, which was passed back in August 2022, where the largest amount of American climate spending to date will be put towards green initiatives. In tandem with deficit reduction plans to fight inflation, the Inflation Reduction Act included significant investments to accelerate clean energy deployment, spur green technologies such as carbon capture and storage, increase green energy jobs, and improve energy security. Shortly after its passage, the European Commission, along with other U.S. trading partners, said provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act broke global trade rules under the World Trade Organization, since certain provisions require manufacturing only in the US. Without rushing to any judgment on this ourselves, let's first get some input on the overall plan. So the overarching goals of the European Green Deal Industrial Plan include four key policy pillars: faster access to funding, enhancement of clean technology skills, open trade for resilient supply chains, and a predictable and simplified regulatory environment. To speed up the process of funding for clean technology investment in the region, the European Commission amended the temporary state aid crisis and transition framework to enhance and expand member state funding access. The European Commission also amended the General Block Exemption Regulation for member states to more easily access funding in specific sectors that support the goals of the Green Deal Industrial Plan. The Commission plans to develop a European sovereignty fund that would facilitate investment in green industrial activities and also include a proposal for net zero industry academies that will help expand and enhance skill development in strategic industries. The rest of the plan is focused on creating a more predictable policy framework to develop green industries locally within Europe. In March 2023, the European Commission announced a few proposals under the umbrella of the Green Deal Industrial Plan to ensure a more predictable policy framework: the Net Zero Industry Act, the European Hydrogen Bank, the Critical Raw Materials Act, and the reform of the electricity market design. To discuss this in greater detail, I would like to welcome our colleague, Emilie Nadler, who focuses on ESG in KBRA. Emilie, can you walk us through some of the overarching goals of the Europe's Green Deal Industrial Plan?
Thank you, Gordon. I'll start with the Net Zero Industry Act, which aims to scale up European net zero manufacturing and creates a strategic goal of increasing domestic net zero technology production to meet 40% of demand by 2030. The Act categorizes 8 strategic net zero technologies, which are solar photovoltaic and solar thermal technologies, onshore wind and offshore renewable energy, batteries and storage, heat pumps and geothermal energy, electrolyzers and fuel cells, biogas and biomethane, carbon capture and storage, and grid technologies. And grid technologies includes electric vehicles, as well as smart and fast charging. So the Act proposes to streamline regulatory and permitting procedures and set time limits on the permitting grant processes for what the EU is calling net zero strategic projects. It also specifically aims to accelerate projects in the carbon capture and storage space, setting a goal of 50 metric tons of annual CO2 storage capacity in the EU by 2030. The Act includes specific proposals at the member state level as well, including a provision to set up regulatory sandboxes that establish a more flexible regulatory environment to test new green technologies.
Thanks, Emilie. Can you talk us through the proposals for the European Hydrogen Bank?
Yeah, so the EU sees the scaling up of regional hydrogen production as a strategic move in the global green technology race. The bank's mission will be to create a domestic hydrogen market and enhance hydrogen imports into the EU by contributing to early market creation and expanding the role of the private sector. The European Commission is moving quickly on this goal and is aiming for the bank to be operational by the end of 2023. Under the EU Innovation Fund, the Commission is also working to implement a hydrogen auction system, which will subsidize hydrogen production through a fixed premium per kilogram of hydrogen produced over a maximum of 10 years. The EC is currently drafting the design of the auction program and will also hold a pilot auction in autumn 2023.
Thank you very much, Emilie. And what about the Critical Raw Materials Act?
The third piece of proposed legislation is the Critical Raw Materials Act that will ensure the EU has access to the critical raw materials necessary to meet the region's net zero targets. The Act categorizes both strategic raw materials, SRMs, and critical raw materials, CRMs, which include things like copper, battery-grade nickel, cobalt, and lithium, among others. It outlines specific benchmarks for the EU to meet by 2030 to scale up domestic capacity in SRM supply chains, and the Act would also simplify and streamline the permitting process for raw materials in the EU.
Thank you very much, Emilie. That is very helpful. The last piece is likely to have the most relevance to credit analysis, which is the reform of the electricity market design. This reform aims to accelerate the shift from fossil fuels to renewables in the EU's electricity system and make consumer bills less dependent on price volatility in the oil and gas market. The European Commission notes that the reform will likely prompt changes to existing pieces of legislation, including the electricity regulation, the electricity directive, and the regulation on wholesale energy market integrity and transparency regulation. The proposals would incentivize longer-term contracts with clean energy production to expand access to affordable, renewable electricity. It would also enable the Agency for the Cooperation of Energy Regulators and member state regulators to better monitor the energy market and enhance transparency. Karim, you and I have discussed the energy market in past podcasts and have written about it a number of times. So let's now turn to you to really get into details of some of the challenges and credit implications for the EU Green Industrial Plan. So what are the main credit implications for the European market?
The most important and immediate impact emanates from the electricity market reform plans, in our view. If implemented in a manner that leads to a decoupling of gas from electricity, this could have repercussions across utilities and producers, such as renewable projects, integrated utilities, and distribution and supply companies. From a credit standpoint, it still remains unclear what financing structures will ultimately emerge, and much, in our view, will depend on the regulatory framework that will support such technologies. For example, in other project finance initiatives, there's been subsidy-based schemes, such as, for example, contracts for difference or regulated asset-based subsidies, or retail initiatives such as feed-in tariffs. Regulatory frameworks and contractual underpinnings will need to be identified and developed to support revenue profiles and allow viable funding structures. Until then, the private sector may remain guarded in terms of support and direct involvement in the stated green targets. The risk is that without the industry engagement and support, it may stunt the growth and ambitions of the plan.
Thank you very much, Karim. That is very helpful. Can you also take us through some of the challenges associated with the European Commission's plans?
Yes. I'll give an overview of the challenges we foresee, but I would encourage listeners to read the corresponding research piece to get a bit more of a detailed explanation on each of these. Any effective implementation, in our view, may need to consider the potential to crowd out private finance. EU funding through bodies such as the European Sovereignty Fund and the European Hydrogen Bank is important and positive, but over time, it will be critical to bring private sponsors and funding to support these initiatives. It's important in the long run that these newly developed value chains are sustainable in their own right and over the long term. The other potential challenge that may rise is competition between member states. However, the relaxed rules may also create an opportunity for smaller nations to support the external expansion of local companies. While supportive of the end goal, the dynamic does risk a government-funded competition for resources. In establishing targets for certain technologies, the EU will need to recognize certain deficiencies that cannot be circumvented through legislation or regulatory reform, such as resource shortages for things like battery storage and decoupling electricity prices from the cost of natural gas. The last thing I did want to mention is the importance for the EU of maintaining a flexible approach in terms of identifying key technologies that are critical towards the net zero path, as well as in how it allocates strategic priorities. There have been examples of technologies that at first may seem promising, but prove to be impractical. An important difference between the US IRA and the EU Green Industrial Plan is that the former is technology agnostic, and in implementation, it will be important for the EU to reconcile this in implementation.
Great. Thank you very much, both of you. So, as highlighted, a full understanding of the credit implications will take time to emerge as the legislation is enacted and market participants react to the opportunities and challenges these policies create. However, the more supportive regulatory environment proposed under the EU Green Deal Industrial Plan is likely to have positive implications for renewable energy and other clean technology projects as increased investment flows to these emerging sectors, helping to mitigate liquidity and refinancing risks. Harmonizing the permitting and licensing rules, regulation, and state funding, and security of the supply chain, such as the manufacturing and supply of raw materials here in Europe, are all important to help kickstart investment in key technologies to support meeting net zero goals and agenda. Conversely, the policies under the European Green Deal Industrial Plan may also increase refinancing risk and liquidity pressures in older fossil fuel assets as investors and lenders' appetite is directed towards net zero production and away from older technologies. This increases the risk of stranded assets, and these policy developments may also accelerate the trend whereby energy producers invest heavily in new green technologies as they make the transition from fossil fuel energy production, with short to medium term implications for leverage and liquidity metrics. As the EU continues to expand and refine environmental-focused policies, KBRA will continue to monitor credit impacts across its rated sectors. You can find greater detail in the report, which is found on our website, kbra.com. Make sure you are registered to receive our latest commentaries and have subscribed, of course, to our podcast. Also, make sure you are engaged with our experienced and intelligent analysts who can help you out with greater detail. Thank you very much for listening. We look forward to bringing you more conversations in European credit. Best of luck to you all out there as we continue to adjust to the challenges ahead.